Hi, Nick Capone, and this is Cultural Catholicism, an exploration into the existence and significance of the Catholic faith within the culture. Today's a special one. I have my best man from my wedding, Bobby Mangiarelli, on, and we talk about his and his wife's journey with infertility through the first 7+ years of their marriage. It's a bit long, but I would urge you to stick with it because his story is incredibly significant. It will provide hope, I think, to those who need it and who share similar struggles and trials, and then you'll be grateful that you make it to the end, because you need to hear this story. It's absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful to him for being a witness and sharing this testimony and this journey with his wife. So with that, please enjoy the conversation. I hope that it is fruitful for you. And here you go. Bobby, thank you for joining me. If anybody had listened to my first episode I put out, you and I had toyed with the idea initially of doing a podcast together, and the plans changed a bit, but this feels so right having a conversation with you. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me on, Nick. I appreciate it.
So I will give full disclosure, actually, that not only are you one of my closest friends, you are actually my best man in my wedding. You're the godfather of my second born, Pio, and we've been friends for going on 10 years or something.
It might be that long, yeah. And it feels right that we met at Mount Carmel. You know,
that's right. We met at a church in Northeast Ohio, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, an Italian American church. We both clearly are repping our Italian colors today, naturally.
That was not planned, but you can't take the Italian out of us for sure. That's right. You know, especially growing up in Youngstown.
So we met. It was a retreat. It's so funny. It was a men's retreat that was hosted respectfully by like a bunch of boomers. And I had one other buddy who was older than me by several years, 5 to 10 years, who invited me to go. And I was in I must have been in my very early 20s. And I was praying for like a group of Catholic men, because everybody my age was just kind of an idiot, or not in the faith. And I was praying for like a good fellowship. And that retreat, hosted again by like men in their 60s, was my last ditch effort. And I ended up at meeting from a previous episode, Justin Bonanno, who is also a godfather to one of my children, and you. So I ended up meeting my two closest friends at the retreat. And so it turns out that it paid off. And then even though, from when I moved to Florida, I don't see you as often, but I'm so grateful. Like, our friendship just hasn't really skipped a beat.
Yeah. I very much was praying for the same thing, but having met in fellowship. I remember when my wife and I got married, and and I have good friends that live here in town, and I love them very much. But I was like, it's always good to have solid Catholic friends that share in the same faith, and you can kind of discuss those things. And I was a little concerned about going on that retreat, because I think you were probably the youngest person there.
I think I was,
and
yes.
I think we brought the mean age of that group like way down, because us guys, I end up building a really good friendship and building that men's group
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I very much in the same boat, was praying for like good Catholic friends, and God is good, and he brought us together. And like you said, we've been in touch ever since. And it's obviously a huge honor that I've been a godfather to Pio, and it's just been a wonderful friendship.
So the thing I remember, one of the things that struck me at that men's retreat, and really is leading into this conversation today, is we had to each get up and introduce ourselves. And you got up and you said, your name. You said you have a wife, and then you said we have one child in eternity. And I had never, obviously that implied something like a miscarriage, but I had never heard of anybody talk about it, like actually talk about their child that would have passed at all. And I remember like right away that stood out to me, and there was obviously a comfort that you had to share that with this group. And I think then it inspired another guy who came up and he shared that he also had a child in eternity. So what I want to focus on is obviously not people in your community and in your circle know this well. I know it well. But what I want to help share is you and your lovely wife, Lenore, you've had a journey with infertility that I'm hearing about like increasingly, like disturbingly often, of young women, especially these young Catholic women who are so excited to start a family and all of a sudden they can't. And it's very distressing. And it's so distressing that it prompted me to think, okay, well, you have this story and we need to share it. We need others to hear your input on this, because I'd say like your circumstances, but also your spiritual growth has just always been incredibly impressive to me, watching you guys walk through that trial. So I think to start, could you share your journey, like as a Catholic in the faith, into marriage and that fatherhood? Kind of dive in and let's get right to it, because I think that there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll start by going back to when my wife Lenore and I were engaged. And I think it's normal, when you're engaged, like you have these conversations of like, kids and how many kids you want. And, and before I met Lenore, I was kind of slowly getting back into my faith because I kind of had this period of like falling away. And then when I met Lenore, I was kind of renewed in my faith, and she really helped accelerate my faith and really ground it for me. And, my wife's also from Steubenville. And if you've ever been to Steubenville, Ohio, it's a very vibrant Catholic community. And when you go to mass there, it's not uncommon that a family has like 10 kids, and my wife is one of 5. And, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law have 6 kids, and like just big families, and you're kind of surrounded by that. And it's very contagious. And you're like, yeah, I really want this big family. It's awesome. And so in fact, I remember before we got married, we were discussing, and I was like, if God would bless us maybe with like 4 kids, I'd be pretty happy. And jokingly, I'd be like, yeah, I want 4 boys. I think it's funny now because you have 4 boys, And yeah, I was like, I want all boys,
I never prayed for that either, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm not sure how God maybe thought of that at that time, but I was like, I wanted a big family, and my wife obviously wanted a big family, and the idea of like getting married and starting a family right away was kind of a new idea for me, because I was kind of always brought up around people who wanted to wait. They got married, they wanted time to do things and travel and kind of maybe, I don't know, grow into their marriage, however they want to perceive it. But it was kind of when Lenore's like, are we going to be open to a family early on? And I said, well, yeah, why not? I feel like this is the right thing to do. And, once we're married, like we're called to be open to life. So, I mean, so right off the bat, we were, kind of on the same page. One of the things I do remember is when we were going through like our pre-Cana, and we did our weekend retreat, all these different couples came up and talked about, the importance of marriage and how their marriage works and how the faith is foundational with it. And I think at the time, like, I was so excited to get married, and I'm like, you're almost like checking off the box. Like, I'm glad to be here. The discussions that were, excellent, but I was just kind of like, all right, I'm checking off the box here. I'm ready to like move on to the next step so we can plan our wedding. But I do remember one talk, and it was this couple that experienced infertility. And it really struck me because it was the first time I thought like, oh yeah, that is something that could happen. And their story was very inspiring because it included loss and years of infertility. And eventually this, I think this couple ended up adopting and then also having like a biological child. And I was like, wow, that was pretty incredible. Kind of got to the root of like your marriage and suffering together. And then after that weekend, I didn't think much about it, because I thought, well, that's kind of rare. Like that would never happen to me, of course, like I want four boys. Like God's going to give you my 4 boys. And my wife and I got married in January 7th of 2017. And right after our wedding, we went on our honeymoon. And when we got back, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that we were expecting. And I was like completely terrified, but I was like part of the idea of, hey, we're open. Like, this is it. Like, I was like one of the first friends to like conceive, and I was of my buddies. I was like, this is pretty cool, And so we had lots of feelings, a lot of joy. And then within a few weeks, unfortunately, my wife started experiencing the the signs and symptoms of miscarrying. And I believe we had an early miscarriage, probably around 8 or 9 weeks. And, at the time, like, I wasn't sure how to feel because, it was just such a new experience. We just went from this ultra high of getting married and then conceiving, and then this idea of we've lost this child. And it pierced my wife's heart so much that we lost this child. And at the time, I was kind of like in shell shock. I was like, I think at the time I was worried about her, how she was feeling and what to do about it. But and you hear from other people like, hey, like miscarriages happen, like 1 in 4 women have miscarriages. So not that big of a deal, like you can just heal and then you could try again. But it left like a deep wound, and it almost, it gets to the point where you want to try again, and you're just, this fear starts to kind of take over, like, hey, what if this happens again? Or, but I was encouraged by my family and a doctor, like, hey, I think you guys are healthy. Like, it shouldn't be an issue. Okay. So after some time, of healing, we were open to having children again. And, so we started trying, and, 1 month went by, 2 months went by, 3 months went by. And, I started getting a little concerned, like, hey, like, why is this not happening? And I think, people are telling us, well, you need to relax, or you're stressed out, or, you just need to take it easy. Like all these things that people kind of perpetuate when you're not conceiving. Like, it's just, hey, you need to loosen up. You need to have a good night out, whatever, like, makes you guys feel good. You guys should just do it. But, my wife early on started to see like, no, there's something wrong, like there's a reason why we're not conceiving.
Real quick, what method of NFP were you using? Do you remember?
Yeah. So I probably should even say, so before we got married, my wife, we took classes in the Creighton model, which is pretty popular among Catholics. It's a way of like charting your cycle and, how you can time conception, knowing the signs of ovulation. And it's also helpful too, which I'll eventually get into, of like diagnosing if there's a problem, based on your charting, like you can kind of see what's going on. It's actually pretty surprising that a lot of couples that I've run into that struggle with infertility have no, they have no history, they have no information, no knowledge of this, because to me, it's almost like the gold standard, but Catholics have been doing it for a really, really long time. And it's obviously a way of being completely open to life every time you have intimacy, and that's kind of like our goal is like to always be open,
And if you follow it correctly, not to interrupt you, but just for any young Catholics might not know, but if you follow it correctly, these methods can be more successful, even if you're trying to time it so that you're in prudence. If you're open to life, but you're timing intimacy to basically not to conceive.
Right.
But you're still fundamentally open, but these methods are more successful percentage-wise than birth control methods, which are obviously, evil. But just, I want to throw that out there, that those methods are higher success, safer, and they're not turning your back on God's will. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers, but I remember when I was learning about the Creighton method and NAPRO, how, if you wanted to sustain from getting pregnant by using the method, it was very successful. But no, like at the same time, like you're not taking away the conjugal act. And, if God wanted to somehow, bless you with a child, even though if you weren't trying, like, that his will can be done. But yeah, we were all on board with that. And, my wife was somebody who was charting prior to that. And we were kind of under the impression that, the cycles are looking normal, like conception should be fine. And like we did conceive. And then like after we had our first loss, we kind of knew something else was going on. And that's when we went to go seek help. So we found a NAPRO doctor within an hour for us. So we started the process of like trying to diagnose like what the root cause is. And if you know anything about NAPRO, their job is to find the root cause of why you're not conceiving or why you're having reoccurring miscarriages, how to improve your infertility. It's really all encompassing for women's health. I always joke when I talk to other like couples or I talk to other women about it, because I tell them like I know more about women's health than probably like most women, So I'm pretty proud of that. But yeah, so we went to this doctor and we started the process. So, and it was pretty exhausting because it was an hour drive. It was many appointments and lots of blood work. It was really challenging physically and time wise. And we started to kind of figure out, okay, why is this happening? Why the chart is looking off? And I would go on these appointments with my wife, and we would spend a lot of time. And the doctor was great, and for years we were working on it. So I remember the first time we met our doctor. She told us that most couples conceive within 6 months, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is great news. Good. And then 6 months go by, and then, you're thinking like, well, maybe we're just the outlier. I'm trying to remain hopeful in that time. But then things started looking a little bit more dreary. And I know that, it started getting to a point where we weren't sure what was going to happen. And it was at that point, I was like, we really have to dial things back. I do remember there was a time where, some of our friends were getting pregnant, and it was very triggering. I mean, it was obviously very joyful to hear others, were expecting. But then there's like this deep wound, like God, why can't we have this gift? Like we've been open to your gift. And
Some of those people were probably taking birth control too.
yeah, maybe. I would hear like things like, oh, I look at my wife and she gets pregnant, and like I would hear these comments, and it would be so like disheartening because you're just like, wow, like here we are like charting, we're charting the cycle. We're doing my wife's doing tons of blood work. We're doing different medications and supplements that kind of help like enhance the fertility, and we're not seeing that result. And I will say over that time, things spiritually started becoming very challenging, and it got to a place where when I look back on it, we were kind of idolizing the idea of having children, and it was actually making the suffering even worse. And we started getting these thoughts like, well, your marriage isn't fruitful unless you have children. When you hear like in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply, it's like, well, why aren't we multiplying? So it's like we weren't getting this like, we were staying faithful to the faith. There was not so much discussion from our internal families because we knew what the truth was, but from outside voices, there was pressure to be like, well, so-and-so I know did IVF and they conceived, and we kind of knew like that's not what we wanted to do. And as much pressure as there was to have that in the forefront as like, well, this could be the quick fix, we never want to waver on what the church's teaching was and the morality of that. And if that meant willing to go through life without having any children, then that was kind of be the case. But I say that, but it was incredibly difficult to just endure it, well, and as we were going through this, there was a time after our first loss, my sister-in-law, Erin, told us about this nun who was coming to Pittsburgh, and we were told that she has like the gift of healing. So we're like, all right, I think this is a great opportunity. We live close by. Let's go see her. So this was Sister Breach McKenna. And she was giving a talk at this local parish in Pittsburgh. We went to the talk.
How long after your miscarriage was this?
I want to say maybe 4 to 6 months, somewhere in that time frame.
Okay.
Where we were like kind of trying, but we weren't conceiving, and there was like this worry of like, why aren't we conceiving? And we were obviously praying about it and trying to remain hopeful, but like the alarm started, like, I feel like we were hitting like the yellow light. You're like, all right, well, what's going on here? Before it was like full blown red light, like, oh, this is a big problem. So we decided, I'm like, well, what do we have to lose? We're open to receiving God's graces, and if maybe this nun can share her wisdom, or maybe the gift of healing would come through her. So we met with her after her talk, and I remember my wife, we pulled her aside, and we kind of told her what was going on. And this little Irish nun, she was very calm, very peaceful, and she sat down with us and said, let's say a prayer together. And then after the prayer, she gave us 3 miraculous medals. And she's like, well, this one's, for the husband, this one's for the wife, and then this one's going to be for your baby one day. And I just remember the amount of consolation I felt from that, the amount of peace that it was like kind of overwhelming. I'm like, wow, I was like, this is what I needed to hear. I just needed to have some type of hope, something to hold on to. And thinking in my head, I'm like, well, why wouldn't God honor this prayer? Well, of course, as any person that's in our age where we want things done now, I was like, well, God, we had this beautiful moment with this nun. I have this miraculous medal. Like, this baby's probably coming soon, you know, and, you know, we were working with this doctor, like I told you, and then time started carrying on. So it was like, you know, a year and then 2 years and then 3 years, and there was no conception. And it was incredibly challenging and difficult, especially for my wife. So if you know anybody who's kind of going through the process, you know, obviously men and women grieve differently. And especially for a woman, you know, there's this kind of idea like your identity's tied to being a mother, you know, like we're all kind of called to like a certain type of motherhood or fatherhood, whether that's biological or adoptive or spiritual. And I could see like how much the pain of not having children was kind of weighing on us during this time. And in my head, I was thinking, you know, I was thinking back to when we met with Sister Breach that, you know, there's still hope, you know? So what I did was I took that miraculous medal and I put it in my scapular and I would wear it. And then when we felt like completely defeated or lost or angry, you know, I feel looking back on it, the Holy Spirit would almost remind me of the medal that I was wearing, because it's so easy to forget, you know, and just like a reminder saying like, you know, almost just like, I'm with you, or, you know, peace be with you, you know, never like, hey, well, this thing is definitely going to happen. But, you know, it was just, you know, in some ways it was almost a blessing that we conceived our first child, because that gave me hope too, you know. So I know there's couples out there that go for years of not even conceiving, you know, and their idea of like, can I even conceive? And that's incredibly challenging and incredibly painful. And it's also incredibly painful to have a loss, but we kind of kept our hope in, well, our child, our eternal child, somebody who we could pray to and intercede for us, who we pray to often, was going to pray for us. And,
Wow.
you know, that God would give us the grace no matter what was going to happen next, you know? So, so years kind of went by, and, we kind of like got to this like fork in the road where, you know, we wanted children, but it didn't seem like biological children were going to be in the picture. And that was really hard. You know, I think, you know, people would say like, oh, you could just adopt. And like, and I think adoption is wonderful. And I think more people should look into adopting or call it to adoption, but it still doesn't take away the pain of like, you know, seeing you and your child, or like their mannerisms, or the way they smell, or the way they act. It's like all these hopes and dreams that you have. And I'm not saying like you don't get those from adopting a child, but, you know, and especially for a mother, a wife who wants to bear their womb and sacrifice their body for 9 months, like, you know, not have the opportunity or hear a heartbeat, or, you know, take that, you know, to go through labor. I mean, it was to a point where we were kind of giving up this, you know, kind of giving up our hopes and our dreams that, you know, maybe we wouldn't have any like biological children. In fact, our doctor was like, I think at this point you should consider adopting, because I don't think, you know,
Had it been years at this point?
Yeah. So 2017 to about, I want to say,
that was 2022 or something.
Yeah. So we started, I think it was 2021 is when we started having the conversations of like, we're not going to have biological children, and that maybe adoption is the best route. And then we were praying about it, And then we decided that we have to be, we need to open up all the doors and see what God wants, you know? And it was hard for me to accept that, but my wife and I would talk like, we want a family and we want to share our gifts with children. And we decided, hey, let's try it, you know? And we were fortunate to meet lots of couples who have adopted, and met some really interesting people on the way who found it incredibly fruitful. So that was very inspiring. So it kind of like got the ball rolling. So in 2022, we started the process. And I remember, I think it was May of 2022, we started applying to adoption cases. And if you ever know anybody that's gone through the adoption process, it's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of money. So that was the next like hurdle for us was it became a little bit of a financial challenge because adoption is not cheap, especially if you're looking to adopt domestically. Adoptions can range from, 25,000, 50,000. I mean, just depending on
It's insane
who you work with and what you're looking for. And we wanted a newborn, and we wanted a child domestically, but so we started getting cases, and we would get a couple cases a week. And then as somebody who's trying to adopt, what happens is they send you this case and you review it, and they kind of tell you the parent's history and what's going on and whether or not the mom wants to be in contact with the baby as they get older. And but so many of these cases that we would experience were just heartbreaking, just like tragic situations, moms doing like a ton of drugs. And it was so hard to read those. And you just knew like, these poor little children needed somebody, and it's like for us being first time parents, we were like, I don't know what we're willing to take on. So, but we'll kind of remain open and see what, as we discern what we should be applying to, and being hopeful that maybe we'd be a good fit for that child. So over that course of like several months, so starting in May, we probably applied to like 40 different cases, and we got turned down for all of them. And
how does that work? You get a case and you might say, yes, we want to pursue this, or what?
So it's basically, so you basically say yes, like, hey, we'll throw our name in the hat, but there's all these other couples who can apply to the case too. So, I remember there was one case where it was just a young mom. She was healthy, like all the things that you hope for when you're adopting. This child was in Florida, and we clearly said yes to it. And then there was like 75 other families that applied to it, so it's incredibly competitive.
Whoa.
And what you do is, depending on the agency, they'll make a little booklet about you. And they essentially give these booklets to the moms, and they kind of flip through them, and they say like, who am I going to choose? So they basically it's usually the mom picks where their child's going to go. And, we were applying to a ton of cases and trying to stay open and seeing what God wanted. And, we would get emails saying, no, sorry, you weren't picked. And I'm like, I did not expect like this to be so challenging. And I'm like, what else more do I have to like sell herself? And I even remember that there were cases where the expectant mom didn't want the child to go to like a Catholic family.
I figured that.
And that was obviously at the forefront of our marriage, and like, the child's going to be Catholic without a doubt. And it was basically like, don't even bother applying if you're going to like raise my kid in like any Christian faith, or especially Catholicism. So there was like some discrimination going on there. And yeah, we just like, we just kept applying, and as time went on, I remember we were kind of exhausted from the process, and we took a family vacation with my wife's side of the family, and we went to St. Augustine, Florida. And if anybody's ever been to St. Augustine, they have what's called Our Lady of the Leche Shrine, and it's a shrine dedicated for couples who've had loss or have infertility, or want to have children. So we went there, and I remember it was on the Feast of the Assumption, and we kind of set up where we would have a priest kind of pray over us after Mass. So we went to Mass there, and we checked out this beautiful shrine, and the priest said some beautiful prayers over us. And again, I had this other similar experience to Sister Breach, just immense peace and joy and hopeful. I'm like, all right, God's like in control. Like, you got this, I'm all in, like, let's make it happen. As we're leaving the shrine, we get, Lenore, my wife, gets a notification email like, oh, there's this case for this little boy. And I was like, this is like God's like perfect timing, I'm like, this is it. Like, we just came out of the shrine, we're here. Like, I was like, this case looks great, so we applied. And we were like so hopeful about, we're like, yeah, this is like God, this is it. Like, this is going to be where our family is, the next step in our family, And a couple hours later, we get an email saying like, sorry, you weren't picked. So like, just like huge disappointment after disappointment. And
That's wild.
I'm like, God, I forget what saint it was. I don't know if it was the Little Flower, where she was like, or maybe Saint Teresa of Avila. But like, God, like, you don't seem to have like many friends if you treat us like a certain way, something on the lines of that. But I was like feeling, I'm like, man, I'm like, in my head, I kept playing it out like how God was going to do it, and it was always just like, I always thought this is going to be this grand thing. Like, I already can see it in my head, but like, God, so, is so beyond that. He was just like, look, settle down there and just, just maintain your peace. And, but here's where I think things, here was the interesting prayer from that moment. So when we went to that shrine, we're praying for the gift of a family and children. And we had this, experience with this adoptive child. We applied to it, didn't get it. Later that evening, my father-in-law unexpectedly pulls us aside and was like, hey, I really think you guys should, I don't want to give up on you guys having your own children. Maybe you need to go to the next step. Maybe you need to go to Paul VI Institute, which is where kind of Dr. Hilgers is, and where they kind of started NAPRO. And it's just like the place, the epicenter for like Catholic fertility treatment, like everything aligns with like Catholic moral teaching on fertility. And he was, telling us like, I think you guys should go. Like, I researched, you just send some information on what's been going on with you, and then they get back to you and see if they can help you. And I was like, so like burnt out. I was like, come on. I was like, I'm so over this. I'm like, it was really nice for my father-in-law to kind of think about that, but I like already kind of like rejected it, and I was like, I'm just like so tired of this process. And my wife was very encouraging, and she was like, look, like, we have nothing to lose at this point. We can still remain in the adoption process. And we said we would leave all the doors open, so here's another door that essentially is opening. Like, why not, see what happens? And she was right. So I was like, let's do it. We'll send them an email and see what they can do for us. All right. So that was in August. Fast forward to October. We're still in the adoption process. We're still applying the cases, and we're not getting anywhere with it. We keep getting rejection after rejection. We finally get a letter in the mail on the Feast of Our Lady La Leche that, and it's from the Paul VI Institute. They were kind of reviewed our case and were like, hey, we think we can help you. We would want you to come out to Nebraska, and we would have to kind of assess you, and we have to, do a procedure and run tests, but we feel like we can help you. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, is this like a little wink from God? But again, I'm like, God, you like to build me up, but then you like to crash me down, I'm like, I feel like, it was just like blow after blow, but we were like, all right, I don't find this as a coincidence. Let's put our name in, let's contact them, and let's start that process. I'm like, we're going down these like 2 roads now, and they get back to us. We finalize something. We're like, all right, we're gonna, the earliest we can schedule you is like in March of next year. And we're like, all right, perfect. I'm like, if we end up adopting, we just cancel it. If we feel like we need to go there, then we'll go, but I wasn't anticipating going, because it's like, I think we're going to get a child. I think we're going to be able to adopt, so 2 months later, I remember, we were sitting in our family room, and we get this case, and, it's for twins for Arizona. And I was like a little overwhelmed about it. My wife was all excited. She goes, this could, 2-for-1 special. And I was like, all right, I like a good deal, and, so I was like, all right, let's apply to it. It looks like a good case. And, a couple hours go by, and we get a phone call, and it's the adoption agency, and they're like, the mom picked you. And I was like floored. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I was like, we literally are going to adopt twins. And I just remember just like, I was so like ecstatic, and like I had so much like fear at the same time, but I was like so pumped. I'm like, dude, I have to call everybody. I was calling family, friends. I'm like, we're adopting twins, and we have to leave in like a week. And it was like chaos. I'm like, this is like insane. I was like, this is the most insane thing we've ever done. In fact, I remember we spoke with a couple who adopted, and the husband was like, he told me, he's like, adoption is going to be the craziest thing you ever do. And I was like, dude, when we got picked, I was like, this is crazy. I'm like, I can't believe we're doing this. But we were so ecstatic. I remember that night we didn't even go to sleep, and we're like scrambling, and I'm like trying to like, move my work schedule around, and we're like booking flights, and the agency's like, you need to come out at this time. The babies are going to be born on this day. And the kids we were adopting, they were coming early since they were twins. They were going to be kind of like staying in the hospital for a little bit. And, which we're like, hey, that's fine. We'll come out. We'll take care of them, So just an immense amount of like joy, but also like, just like fear, I think I remember I was telling you about it. It almost felt like, when Mary and Joseph are fleeing like in the desert, and like exactly where we were going to the desert to like get these children, and like the angel told Joseph, like, you need to go. And I very much felt that way. I'm like, all right, we need to go. And, we show up to Arizona, and, we meet the mom, and we meet these little tiny.
What time of year was this again?
This was December of 2023. I believe we arrived in Arizona on December 7th. So we were expected to be there for a while, because these were kind of preemie babies, and they were going to be in the NICU for a while. And, you have to finalize all the paperwork. There's all this like legal stuff you got to do in order to like acquire these kids. So we get there, and we meet these little children. We're excited, and we're holding them.
I remember you texted me, and you said, I'm holding them for the first time. I've never felt love like this before, and now I understand why God said no repeatedly up to this point.
Yeah, right. And I just remember looking over, because, my wife's got a child in her hand. I got one in my hand, and I'm like looking over at her, and she's just filled with like so much joy. And I'm like, yeah, this is like why we waited so long. You know, like this was what God wanted all along. And, you know, and you're just holding these tiny little children, and you're just like, it's amazing. You know, it's like you finally like get that joy. So as we're like kind of like figuring out this paperwork stuff while we're there, we're kind of hit with this news that, you know, hey, like we need to get sign off on both parents, you know, both like the biological parents, but we think the biological dad is not the actual like dad is not the dad. We think it might be a different dad. And I'm like, all right, well, do we know who the dad is? And they're like, well, we kind of have an idea. And I'm like, all right, well, get them to sign those papers and let's, let's go, you know? So, you know, I remember we were leaving the hospital, and I'm like, kind of I'm annoyed. I'm like, dude, this is going to be all right. Like Lenore's already thinking like worst case scenario. We've been hammered so many times. Like, I'm like, all right, no, this is like too good. This is too good. We're going to be fine. But slowly but surely we find out, who thought who the dad was not the dad, and ends up being this other gentleman. And, you know, in the adoption world, you have to, like I said, you have to get like basically like signatures from both parents, unless the dad, like they don't know who the biological dad is and he disappears. Like there's like a 30-day like window.
Right. I remember that.
to petition it, you know, if they want to come forward and say like, I'm the dad, and do a paternity test. And, we find out there's this other, who the real father is. And we're like, all right, well, just have him sign the papers. Well, this guy's like, hey, I think I want to parent these kids. And the agency's telling us like, hey, look, the process for him to do this, he has 30 days. He has to do a paternity test. He has to, he basically has to serve papers to her, and they have to like go to like set up a court date and all these different things. They're like, he has 30 days to do it. That even counts Sundays. Like, don't even worry about it. It never happens. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm like, all right, well, just get through this. So we're there for a little over a week, and all of a sudden the dad, like the biological dad, like he does a paternity test. He's like checking off all the boxes. I'm like, this guy's like legit. Like I was like, we're not going to get these kids. And there was like all this pressure on us to stay out there while the kids were in the NICU to take care of them. And I was like, we were kind of unsure what to do. You know, there's the agency's like, I would hope you would wait this whole thing out. I'm like, look, we can't stay out here forever. Like, you know, we're like going from like an Airbnb, or we're staying with some random person that my brother-in-law knows. I'm like, you know, we have a dog back home, where I'm like, I was like, we can't just like stay here for a month while this all kind of undone. It was in that moment where I started really leaning on St. Joseph. Like I was telling you before, like, you know, the angel came to Joseph and kind of told him what he needed to do. And I was very much inspired by that. And it was the most incredible, like, intercessory prayers I've ever experienced. Because I started praying to St. Joseph. I'm like, you know, what is your, you know, pray to God. What does he want for us? You know, give me the strength to endure this. Like, should we be here? And then all these things started falling into place. Like, I started like saying like, you know, I think we're supposed to go home. Like, this is not going to happen. Like, this is not going to go through. And of course my wife's like breaking down, like, no, we have to stay. And I'm like, it was like some of the hardest like decisions, because you're like, you're you know, and you're putting all this pressure on the agency. Basically you're backing out, and it looks bad. But I'm like, I felt very much in my heart, I'm like, we came here, God used us for a certain purpose. he wanted us to hold these children, to feed them, to clothe them, and they needed somebody's love and touch, and as I kept praying to Saint Joseph, I just felt very much like we need to go home. Like this is not going to happen. The long story short, they the two biological parents end up have split custody of those kids, and in some ways I give the biological father a lot of credit for stepping up and being like, those are my kids, like I have to be responsible. But it was one of the hardest things is just to turn away. And I remember when we had to say goodbye to those little kids, it was one of the most gut-wrenching things,
You guys kind of picked out, I don't think they stuck, but you had even named them.
Yeah. So Luca and Kiara, we had names picked out. My mom was ordering furniture and setting up in our house. People are buying us all these clothes. We were going to the Bye Bye Baby store and buying a double stroller, and we were just and when we found out when we got the sense this is not going to happen, again it was so painful, saying goodbye to the children and telling all the friends and family and returning all the strollers and car seats and people we return, and the people there felt so terrible for us. We're it was just so heartbreaking. And it was kind of in that moment where it was such heartbreak that we kind of started thinking maybe we're not called to adopt. Maybe we're just not called to have any children. And those were some of the conversations we started to have. I was asking Lenore, would you be okay if it was just you and me? And maybe God wants to use our marriage in other ways of being fruitful, and we had these big, long conversations about it. And, my wife and I very much found we would spend an hour a week in adoration, praying about these things. There was moments where we felt a lot of peace and joy that we were, maybe on the right page, or we were, God was going to bless us in this certain area. There was also times of just anger and frustration, and I would sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament sometimes and just have nothing to say to God and be it's I know you're God and I'm so broken, you have to fix me, or, I don't know why he won't allow this. I remember kneeling in front of the altar and just begging him. I'm why won't you fulfill this this
Good
little
request.
joy yeah. I'm not asking to be a millionaire, God. I just want to be like a father. But God's really interesting. So if I could rewind a little bit, there were so many times where I was we were praying for the gift of a child, we're praying to Saint Gerard, we're praying to this saint. And then all of a sudden it'd be hey, my sister has her son Tommy, and she's I want you and Lenore to be the godparents. I'm oh, this is great, And then and it's God answered that prayer. He's you are going to be a father. You're going to be a spiritual father in some capacity to, my nephew. And then my Lenore's brother, John, and his wife, Betsy, they have their son, Charlie, and they asked us to be the godparents. I'm oh, look, God's answering that prayer again. And I was very much joyful about those, but I'm God, you really know what the real prayer I want, and then you asked me to be godfather to your son Pio. And I'm and I kept thinking maybe this is just what God wants. He doesn't want us to have children, but he's fulfilling it in other areas. I remember we would have conversations with couples with infertility or loss, and, just sharing our experience was healing for people, because they could see people are truly trying to carry that cross Because sometimes it's like a silent cross. You know, you look at a couple in the pews at mass, and you're just some people think like, there's one end of it where people can be like, well, I wonder if they're contracepting and, they don't want children, I've had, I remember I was at work one time and I had a patient of mine saying like, oh, do you have kids? And I said, no. And, she responded like, oh, you want that dink lifestyle. I'm like, dink lifestyle? I'm like, what's that? And she's like, it's double income, no kids. And it was such a piercing blow that people thought that that's what we wanted, not even knowing who I am. And it was just like, it was so devastating to hear that. I remember I was like, just so shook after that and like so angry. I'm like, it's like the furthest from the truth that like, that's what we wanted. If people only knew the amount of resources we exhausted to like have children, between adoption and fertility treatment and traveling and all these things. Like, I mean, we were like, it was not easy. It's not like we were, sitting pretty with a bunch of money. It was just constantly just things were just constantly getting taken away. Time, money, energy, our hope, all these things. So after our trip to Arizona, the idea of adopting started dwindling away, and the agency felt really bad. And they were like, hey, when you get the next case, we're going to kind of really push you guys. And I was just like, I just don't think we could do it. I'm like kind of checked out, and that was hard too. Cause again, my wife, these decisions are always made together. But as the husband, you kind of like, when you kind of see the writing on the wall. And I think as men, we're the ones that kind of have to like set the record straight, and like we have to kind of, as much as it's fun to romanticize ideas, we have to bring people back to reality. Like, this is what's going on, so we decided that we were no longer to adopt. And then we only had one more card to play, and that was our trip to go to Nebraska.
Before you get into
March.
that, how much money do you project that you spent on the adoption process? If you don't mind sharing, I mean, it can be a rough number, but I want people to know that broken system and how ridiculous it is.
Oh, I'm going to say somewhere between that $40,000, $50,000. When before we kind of knew what was all going on with the adoption process. I mean, this is all like, you have to have like all the legal stuff figured out, like paperwork. You have to do like a home study. You're basically writing all these checks, and we hired like an adoption consultant who basically like helps you through the process. So you're just constantly writing checks. And we were fortunate enough to have family that was generous to help us with some of those needs, especially our parents. Our parents were super helpful and super supportive through that whole process. But I remember we signed a contract, we sent the money to the agency, and basically they were like, well, if you decide you back out of our adoption process, like, we keep half the money. And I was like, okay, like, that's like a little crazy. I'm like, what are you going to do? Like, you did nothing, And they're like, well, if you stay in the process, that money just carries over to your next adoption process. And we just kind of knew like this was not going to be for us, So we took like a huge financial hit doing that. But we just felt like in our heart, like, look, like, I'm not going to be at the mercy of this system. And, if we don't feel like it's right, then like we have to move on, I just always felt, and I always knew like God would like provide in a certain way financially. And he ended up doing that for us. So in the end, it ended up being okay. But, when you're seeing like that amount of money just go, you're just like for nothing. You're like, wow. I'm like, this
It's
is just
mind
like,
blowing.
it's just like a brutal reality, you know? So, but yeah, we again, we just were like, hey, we're done with this process, and we're gonna jump off this boat, and we're gonna see if we can, see if we can hop on this other one and see if there's any hope left.
Because it's near
and
March now, right? Now that appointment's coming up.
Yeah. What was interesting is like when we scheduled that appointment, they're like, we could get you in January, but March is like, is probably the ideal time frame. And I was like, let's just do March, because I want that time to like look at adoption still. Because if we had that appointment in January, I would have called him once we were in Arizona. I'm like, dude, we don't need your services. I'm done, yeah. So the timing ended up being pretty good. So, and the reality was, I try to remain hopeful that this was going to work out. But in the end of the day, for me, it was more so that to have peace of mind. So if like we went to the institute, Paul VI Institute, and they were like, you guys just can't have like any biological children. Like I was just like ready to be at peace about it. And that's what I was anticipating, So
because you'd already been told that.
Yeah. So we just, but we were like, hey, we got the letter, Feast of the Lady of La Leche. Like there's something there. Let's go. So we drove out there, like a 12-hour drive. We just did in one day. The next day we're like meeting with like the doctors and the team, and they're reviewing things. And my wife had to undergo a laparoscopic procedure. Essentially, they have to kind of look what's going on the inside. So, one of the things that women the reason why women can experience infertility is because of conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome and endometriosis, or maybe there's something wrong with the fallopian tubes are blocked. Like they do this like full assessment, and they're looking over like all your charts. So we had like years of charts. They were like blown away. I'm like, we got I was like, we got the data. And they were like, this is like really helpful that you have all this. I mean, we have like years of charting, and if you know any women that have done that, it's very tedious process to like look at this chart. And then every week, I believe when you get pregnant, you can kind of like highlight the day on your chart, like when you conceived, So, so my wife undergoes this procedure, we're at Creighton Hospital. And the beautiful thing about this hospital is they had this little chapel. So I remember going in there and praying. I'm just begging God, like, just make sure my wife's okay. Like I wasn't praying for any children. I kind of like got tired of saying that prayer. I was like, I've said this prayer a million times. I was like, I just want my wife to come out, good, healthy, and then whatever it be, that's it. And then I remember they called me, and my wife was in recovery, and the doctor's like, hey, like everything actually looked over pretty good. We had to do a couple things here and there. We're gonna kind of piece it all together, and we're gonna come back like next week, and we'll discuss the process. We'll see what we could do. So my wife like recovered a few days, and then as we went back, like the doctor was like very optimistic. We're like, hey, like we think we found the source of like why you weren't conceiving, why you weren't like why your cycle was looking irregular. Like we think we checked out this, we wanted to look at this blood work, and we're gonna fix all that. And I was like, awesome. I'm like, well, how soon can we expect to get pregnant then? And she's like, within 6 months. And I'm like, oh, I was like, I heard this before.
Yeah, right.
but I felt more reassured. I was like, all right, this is awesome. I was like, I can't believe we're getting this like good news. Cause I was going out there like, I just want closure. I want God to say, like, tell me, close this door. And I even said that prayer. I was like, God, just close this door. I'm like, why do you keep leaving it open?
I want to add that in your watching you through that journey, and I'm trying to think when that men's retreat was. It might have been 2017 or something like that. So like I watched you through almost this entire process, in hearing your like getting this like honored to have this spot where I hope I walked well with you in the hard times, but I got to hear you wrestle with God all the way, and like watching from the things that you said initially, and every time you had this more mature, more battle worn, but like more humble uniformity to God, like the yeah, you're like your obedience to him every time inching along. But that was your one prayer that I remember. The whole thing is you just kept why won't he just close it or like give us the child? Why do we have to be walking in the desert for like, 40 years? Not know, like, why do we have to not know year after year after year? I think that was the one thing I heard from you is close the door, God, close the door. Because it's so hard to not know. That's harder than getting a yes or no. Is like, you just wait.
Yeah, that exactly. Yeah, God answers what prayers three ways, like yes, no, or like wait.
Mm-hmm.
And he like very much wanted to wait. And I the experiences that we were having, like going to Arizona with the adoption, I felt like you feel like Job, where you're just getting like stripped of everything, and then I feel like Abraham, I'm like we're constantly like, I feel like being called to like sacrifice our hope in having a child. It's like third on the altar, and we're going to sacrifice that. And I like
Repeatedly,
and I would begrudgingly say that prayer and be like, God, if you don't want us to have children, like then your will be done, but like make it clear, because I'm getting tired, like we're getting frustrated. Like this is so drawn out, and like, it's just, my patience is wearing thin, and, we were again hit with like another sense of hope, and I'm thinking like, all right, is this it now? I'm like Sister Breach and the medal, and like, going to Our Lady of La Leche, and then like going to the Institute. I'm like, is this journey finally coming to an end? So a few months after going to the Institute, we found out we're pregnant, and we're like, oh, this is like unbelievable. I'm like years have gone by since we've had our first loss.
how many years was it by this point?
So this was 2000.
It was 2023, right?
Yeah, this was in 2023. So we're like, 6 years. We're like 6 years into it, right? It's 2017, 2023.
So you hadn't conceived in 6 years.
Right. And, I don't even like believe it, I'm like, the doctor's like, you have to do a blood test just to confirm it, and I'm like, I was like, oh gosh, I hope this is not like a false positive. But no, we get the blood test, and we're like, we're pregnant. And,
I want to jump in again. I don't mean to interrupt you, but this was when we were also expecting Pio, and we were about to move to Florida.
Yeah.
We went to dinner with you guys, and we were all kind of like, we're both pregnant at the same time. This is amazing.
Yeah, we're like talking about names. We're talking about some of our hopes and dreams. Like this is like super awesome.
From my perspective, getting to like we knew we weren't gonna, because we hung out, I think, fairly often for two like working men, but it was, from my perspective, I just want to add that like I had this such joy for you, because I'm like, it's a new season of life for both of us. Like I'm going to Florida, I'm going to miss you guys, Courtney and I would miss you guys deeply, but I remember even the last time we saw you in the church parking lot, and you guys held hands and you walked off after you said goodbye, and I was like, they're going off, finally they conceived, she's pregnant. And it was kind of like, you're gonna sit in this new life of fatherhood where, we won't get to kind of hang out as much or whatever, but I'm having this new season and you've got your new season.
Yeah. So, uh, we were like just so filled with joy and like, yeah, it seems like we were like hitting this transition of life finally. And like, we were like, rest assured, I'm like, all right, this is finally going to be like, the next part of our family. And, after everything we've gone through, like, there's no way like God's going to disappoint now, like he has, we have gone through the desert for so long and he wants to fulfill our hearts. And, all those prayers came to this point. And I remember going to adoration with my wife and being pregnant and being right in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and just like saying like, thank you, God, like a million times. I was like, this is you, you are the God of the universe, the creator of everything. I'm like, this is it, And then we
I
get
got a,
this,
I got a text.
yeah. And then we, started seeing signs and symptoms again of possibly miscarrying. And well, what happened was we were going for ultrasound, and um, we remember going to the room, and I remember Taylor Swift was playing, and this is why I don't even like want to hear her voice anymore, because I'm so like connected to this. Uh, but it was very vivid. And my wife's getting this ultrasound, and the ultrasound tech looks over and is like, "There's no heartbeat." And we're like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat." And um, I just, again, I felt like my stomach just like fell like out of me. My heart was like exploding. I was like, the anger was like enraging in me again. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. And leading up into that, we were kind of like worried about this ultrasound. And I'm like, no, like everything's like fixed. And like, we're doing like, we have all like, we're on like, we're doing like the progesterone and shots and things that help with like miscarrying and stuff. Like we're doing everything we're asked to do. And that's the one thing I'll say about my wife is she was so obedient to what the doctors were telling her, because that's how she is. She's just like, I'm going to do everything I can. People are going to help me, and I'm going to do what you asked me to do. And we were so shocked that find out like this child was lifeless. And, um, we really, we really grieved that loss, because it was just a culmination of all the suffering we endured up until that point. And just when you feel like there's like the light at the end of the tunnel, the hope, the resurrection, you're like, it's like getting nailed to the cross again. And it's like, God, why do you just keep nailing me to the cross? I'm just like, I'm like, this is just, it was just like, I was speechless. I'm speechless now, just like thinking about it. I just remember like consoling my wife, and she was so devastated. And then, we were fortunately able, when my wife passed the baby, we were able to get the remains of the baby and actually bury the child. And, as you know, Monsignor Criglio, who's very much involved in our lives, was the one to help us with that. And, it was, I'll never forget. It was like, I remember leading up into that point, like there was so much like suffering going on. I remember hurting my back, and like we had the miscarriage, and like my wife and I's marriage was really tough after that suffering. And I'm like, this is awful. I'm like, and like, I was like so hopeless at that time. And, I remember I could barely move around, and we're going to like bury our child into the ground. And I'm like, you know, um, I'm like telling family and friends, like, this dream is no longer going to happen, and it was just super heartbreaking. And, thankfully with the, we had lots of family and friends like come to our aid and pray for us and offer us to make dinner and like, kind of help lighten the, the burden during that time. But, and we were just, again, we were unsure, like, you know, like, why all this pain? Why all this pain? And we weren't really sure what to do at that point. It's like we were just kind of, we took a while to like try to heal from that process. And I could tell you, if anybody who's ever miscarried, you just never like fully get over it. I'm still not over it. And you know, it's just it's like just a wound that never heals almost.
And people, I would say, like, don't know even how to treat you when you have one, because I know I know several people who have miscarried, and when you get the news, you don't really know what to do because you don't want to make them more sad. So you don't know whether to embrace it as if they suffered the loss of a child outside the womb. You don't know if you want to, if like you act like it didn't happen. It's almost like no one knows how to act. And that makes it worse because it makes it almost like a dream. It's almost like the child existed almost in thought. It's like it wasn't tangible, but it was immeasurably tangible. It's this weird, that's my take on it. And, so far we have not experienced one, but like we could. So many people do. And it's just, is that a fair reading of experiencing? It's like you don't really get the full experience. It's almost like a foot in each boat or something.
Yeah, I think what's hard is you always look for like maybe inspiration or wisdom when you're going through something like that, and they're just not a lot out there. And I think the Catholic Church is really big on having lots of kids and having these big families, and they always praise those families that are open to life and they have these big beautiful families, and we all agree like that's a wonderful thing. But there's like this area in the church for the couples who don't have children or who have had losses or sitting in the pews, and you never hear anything about like, um, w- w- your vocation beyond just like having children, and so yeah, when people hear that you have a loss, it's kind of like, um, you're right. They don't even know what to say. And we always found like it was better like if people just didn't have anything to say, because it's always something, like, hey, you just try again, or, I'm like, well,
Just
we've been
adopt.
trying. Yeah. Or just adopt, like
You're like, we tried
kind of
that.
these, yeah, just, I think our human nature, we always want to have something to say and give advice because, we want to feel like we're doing something, but yeah.
What would you recommend people say if someone says they lost a child from miscarriage? What's a good response? Like, I'm praying for you.
I think, well, always first and foremost, yeah, like prayer, like prayer is always at the root of it. I mean, if we want to receive those graces, like we have to ask God for them, and we have to pray to God for the graces for those people who are suffering, and in hopes that they will act upon those graces so that they can heal, because it's really easy to be bitter and angry at God because, we know God doesn't will couples to miscarry or to be infertile. He wants to fulfill us. Um, but I always felt it's good if you lose a child to name the child and that you pray to that child. And, so
Because
we
it was a
regularly,
baptism by, what is that called? Baptism by desire.
yeah, I know like the church has always had like different stances on it, but, you know, I'm under the impression that, you know, children who are lost in the womb, if the parents' will was to baptize the child, then they would be baptism by desire, So um, we ultimately leave it in God's hands and how He orchestrates all these things. But I think it's super healthy to name the children. We didn't know the sex of our children, but we just kind of felt like, our first one was a boy, so we named him Pietro or Peter, and then we named our second child that we lost, Kiara, and we, regularly prayed to them, and um, you know, I feel certain that they hear my prayers. So we have these two little intercessors in heaven, and there's some peace to that and hope that, again, if my wife and I, as we go through life with no children, there's children at the end of that, hopefully in the next life, where we're all part of the one big family in heaven, um, and that was always a consolation too. And that's why when I would have conversations with my wife, I'd be like, is just us so enough, And I think ultimately everybody has to ask that, because we're not guaranteed anything. This is all just, children just are an abundant gift, but also marriage is an abundant gift. And it's
Right. Well, marriage is a
equal.
sacrament. Having children isn't.
Yeah. So I remember coming across a quote from Jose Maria Escriva, and he said, I have it here. He said, God in his providence has two ways of blessing marriages, one by giving them children, and the other, sometimes, because he loves them so much, by not giving them children. I don't know which one is a better blessing. I mean, that sounds so paradoxical, but there is so much spiritual fruit there, I think, for couples who don't have children. And I know like that wound never goes away. We're all carrying different wounds, but I very much believe what the saint had to say about that. But we have to allow God to show us what he wants, and my wife and I, we're preparing for that. Be like, what is our calling going to be? Outside of children, how can I give my time? I'm in some ways, I am a spiritual father. I'm a godfather. My wife's a godmother. We have tons of nieces and nephews. What can I do more with the church? How can I give myself more to God? Those are the things we started preparing, because we're just like, hey, like, this is the reality. Children, they're just not going to be in the picture. And, God will use that suffering. We always say, God will use that suffering for good, but we truly have to believe it. We truly, truly have to believe it. We can't just say it, we have to beg God to reveal that to us. And he will, and there's plenty of couples who have had no children and, have done wonderful things. I mean, our Blessed Mother's parents were infertile for like 20 years, St. Anne and St. Joachim. And, they lived out their marital vocation beautifully, and they were prepared for that, or I even think about somebody like St. Joseph, who was given the opportunity to be an adoptive father, to our Lord. In some ways, the Holy Family is like really interesting, because you have like, you know, you have like the traditional, you have your marriage, then you have, perpetual virginity from Our Lady and why that's good. And then you have like their nucleus as a family, husband, wife, and son, Saint Joseph as like a spiritual father, adoptive father, however you want to identify it. And then
Right, kind
also
of
like,
showing that that's equal to the natural parent in Mary.
yeah. So God, like some way he's infused all those ideas and made them perfect, and I think like, we have to kind of reflect on that, you know, I mean, if God wanted, like God the Father wanted to do things differently, he could have done it, he didn't necessarily need, the Holy Family. He could have came flying, God could have came flying down on a chariot and did his thing and rolled out. But, he wanted us to experience that. And just like, he wanted us to, he wanted us to become our nature so that we know that God truly loves us. He knows what it feels like to have loss and death and loneliness and all the things, even our Blessed Mother losing a child, she knows, so we should go to Our Lady, and meditate on that and, ask for her intercession as we kind of endure those crosses,
I want to say too that like in your the what you're talking about now, you're talking about this after your second miscarriage of like identifying, the significance of just marriage and that vocation, and its value, its worth is not tethered to children. But I remember were working on that concept through all these years. You just kept asking that question, and you and Lenore kept focusing on that, because I want to just point out that you said your marriage really struggled after the second miscarriage, but you got through it, like, and I think it's because you guys were fortifying your sacrament all along the way. That wasn't something you did after the second. You were doing that, building it up, and it was taking these barrages. I mean, you guys were like, obviously, if you had difficulties, I can never tell, but I know where you are today. And so I want to point that out, that focusing on marriage as the cornerstone it got you both through all those storms.
Yeah. I mean, Christ talks about building your foundation on rock. And I think, when it comes to your marriage, like that's first and foremost is what you have to do, like you have to live out your faith no matter what comes your way. And I know it's really easy to get angry at God. And I remember there's times where, I never doubted the tenets of like the Catholic faith, but it just feel like, people pray and are blessed with these wonderful gifts, and we're not getting blessed with anything. But I think God was blessing our marriage in a very unique way of like, and giving us all those years, just us two, of just like strengthening our marriage. In some ways, I think of the person I was when I got married, that if God were to bless me with the 4 boys that I wanted, then I don't know if I would be spiritually where I'd be at now. I think it did take that time of being in the desert and learning to trust God and relying on him and having him strengthen my faith and virtue, that he, God ultimately wants me. He wants my wife, and he wants our marriage to be fruitful, however that's going to be. But I think that time of my wife and I was just undoubtedly fruitful, and I think that's when I reflect on it, that was great, God knows better, um, but just something, I've reflected on over the years.
Though it has made you, I mean, I can say this, and I'm not saying it to inflate your ego, but you, after going through all this, I know a lot of Catholics, and you are easily one of the most authentically strong Catholics I know. I mean, there's a reason why I asked you to be my best man and a godfather to my child. But like, you guys have been through it, and it has made you this steady, stable, deeply devout Catholic. Not in like a, I don't know, not in like a, just like authentic though. Like you still live life, you still like sports, you still, it's not like you're some sort of like married monk, but you are one of the strongest Catholics I know. So I think you're a great witness to me. And that's why I'm hoping that this will show that to even one other person, that you go through it, you stick to God, and I'm sure that you're a holier man than you would have been if you had your 4 boys.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely wouldn't. My wife, I should speak for both of us that we would not be where we're at spiritually now. We talk about like the spiritual life and how you're either progressing or regressing, like all the suffering, but it almost was like a ladder leading us closer to God. As long as we kept acting upon those graces, like God was fortifying our marriage. And that's ultimately, I think, as married couples, like that's what we want, first and foremost. Like, it's really easy to get caught up on like a certain life you want or a lifestyle. And, like I said, growing up, I always had this idea of like, get married later in life and like have kids when you want them. And, kind of like, and I'm not just, putting down anybody who does it that way, but it's really easy to fall into the trap. Like you're just living for yourself, and, the, it's almost so important that your marriage like endures crosses. Like, I don't think anybody talks about that. Like, I don't hear any, like, sometimes I don't hear the priest get up on the pulpit and talk about that. Like, we talk about like, staying your faith and prayer and like, all the great stuff about the church, but like, we don't probably talk enough about the suffering, like even like pre-Cana, and that's why I look back on that one talk, and that was the one that stuck with me. It's the only one I remember is the cross that couple bared, because I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. And there's a lot of fruitfulness from that, but like we think like, oh, well, we, a lot of times if the marriage doesn't go the way you want it, you just give up. You're like, well, I'll just do it again with somebody else, or I'll just do whatever I want. And it's like, that's not the calling,
Right. So, okay. You really locked in after your second miscarriage on all of these things. So you're struggling, going through it, battling the worst thing possible, which is discouragement. But you're kind of like taking ownership now, and everything's settling in about, your vocation and your sacrament of marriage. What happens next? What happens from then to now?
So we took time to heal from that new wound, of losing, our child. And, we remember connecting with like the Institute, and they said like, hey, you could do everything perfectly and these things still happen. And, but I'm hopeful that you guys would be open and try again. It's like, of course we'd be open to that.
Did they have an idea of what happened specifically? Or were
Well,
they just
this is where so the Institute was one piece of the puzzle. So this next part was another piece of the puzzle. And people are probably like, the story keeps going. I'm like, yeah, it keeps going.
Try
So
living it.
yeah, try living it. Right. So, well, my wife, who is somebody who uh, is willing to give it everything, was trying to turn over every stone. And she found that some women that have recurring miscarriages can have almost like an immuno response. It's like kind of this emerging like medicine. And there's a few doctors in the country that kind of like look at the body this way. Okay. Again, they're called reproductive immunologists. And for whatever reason, just like how people develop like lupus or MS, you know, eczema, like how your body has like these odd immune responses, like women supposedly can have like a immune response to being pregnant to a foreign person in your body. So she was researching these things and was like, hey, there's this doctor in Detroit that looks at the body this way, like maybe we should investigate it. And I was like, oh man, I was like, again, I'm like burned out. I'm like, we just went to the Institute. They reassured us everything was okay. So she's like, well, what if I put my name down and we'll see if there's something available and we could do it if we want to. And if we don't want to do, that's fine. I'm like, okay. So, we, so July, we lost our child. And then in November, we started trying again. And we found out on the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe that we were pregnant again. And I'm like, oh, here we go again. I'm like, this is like the 15th round. I'm like, here we go. Is this going to
Feel like
be,
Rocky.
it's just, yeah, I know. I feel like I'm fighting like the Russian guy, just getting like bounced around. So we find out we're pregnant and I'm like, awesome. I'm like, all right, we kind of gone through this process before. We're going to kind of do it again. So this doctor calls us and say, hey, we have something available in January. And they're like, do you want to come? And I'm like, I really don't want to go. I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm done with doctors. Like we already have like a really good one. And I was like, I don't think it's going to make a difference. I didn't know much about it. I was just kind of like, I kind of blew it off. And then my wife was like, kind of like, well, this doesn't hurt to go. And like, it could be beneficial. And I was like, let's see what our doctor in Nebraska thinks. And she emails the doctor and I'm like, I already knew in my mind. I was like, she's going to say no. Like, you guys don't need to do that. And then we get an email back and the doctor's like, yeah, I think you should go. And I was like, wow. I was like, talk about like some humility, I guess. Like, a doctor's like, hey, I think you should be open to anything. And like, they're like, we're not super familiar with that area of medicine, but, I think you should go. And so we decided to drive up there. I was like hoping like this is not going to be an issue or they weren't going to find anything. And you can do your initial appointment and you get an ultrasound. And I remember the ultrasound tech, we're talking to her and she's like, where are you guys from? And, small talk kept carrying on. And essentially she found out we were Catholic. And then we find out she's Catholic. I'm like, all right, this is good, And she was like, you should, while you're in Detroit, you should go see like Father Solanus Casey's, tomb, his shrine's here. And she's like, do you know about him? I was like, yeah, he's like the priest that was like really quiet and didn't do a whole lot. And she's like, well, he did a lot, and you should go check him out like while you're here. And I'm like, all right. I was like, So I was like, maybe after our appointment, we'll go over there. And so we meet with the doctor, and he was like, hey, I think that you have like one of these kind of how should I describe it? Like, you have like an autoimmune response to when you're pregnant. Like, there's indicators for that, you know, and we're going to confirm that through some blood work, and we're going to find that out. So we're like, okay. And they're like, you're currently pregnant. So like, we put you like on a treatment protocol, like while you're pregnant to help, you know, the pregnancy. And, you know, and that was it. So we get the blood work done. We find out, you know, like my wife's like immune cells are like elevated than they should be in pregnancy. So she was actually experiencing like this immune response that's abnormal. And so we took the doctor's advice, and with the help of the Institute and this doctor, we're like, all right, we're going to do like kind of combine this and do this program together. But we left this, this doctor, his name was Dr. Durbala. We went to Father Casey's shrine. I'm like, doesn't hurt to go. We'll ask for Father Casey's intercession. We'll visit his tomb and pray. And we go there, and there's these friars there, and they tell us about the shrine, and it's this pretty holy place. And he gives us these third-class relics of Father Casey, and he's like, I recommend you carry this with you at all times. And I was like, I'll do it. You know, I was like, I kept it in my wallet, and like, you know, Lenore kept it with her, and every time she like went to a doctor visit, she had the miraculous medal. She had the Father Casey third class relic. We had, you know, we had like everything. We had all the sacramentals. You know, we were sacramentaled out. And one of the things the ultrasound nurse was telling me about Father Casey, she goes, you know, he would say, thank God ahead of time. Thank God ahead of time.
In advance, yeah.
And so we decided like we're going to use that prayer during this pregnancy. Like, we're going to thank God for the gift of this child when the child's born, for full term pregnancy, you know. But we would go week after week, and it would be just so challenging mentally, you know, especially in early pregnancy, you know, especially we got around like the 9-week mark about, you know, we had the loss with our second child with the heartbeat. But we're kept praying to God and staying faithful. Like, we're thanking you ahead of time that this child's going to come all the way, be a healthy and beautiful child, the child that you would call us to take care of, you know? And that took a lot of trust. And, so we just took it week by week, and, you know, we had doctor's appointments, and my wife endured tons of pain with shots and, you know, doing blood draws, and she was like a pin cushion, you know, she was constantly like needles being put in her.
It's funny because it's even like everything's lined up the best. It looks the best that it has yet. And yet it's kind of like, it's like God zoomed in now from years to months or even weeks. Like every week now matters for you. Every week is purgation and patience and suffering. It's like, even if this third time, even if this is the child that's actually born, it's like, you're not gonna get there without blood, sweat, and tears, basically.
Yeah, there was going to be no free lunch, as they say. You know, like it's just like it was never going to be easy, and that's all we could do. We took it week by week. We were going in adoration every week. You know, we had you know, I was praying certain prayers to Our Lady of La Leche. I was saying lots of prayers of Saint Joseph. I very much felt comforted by Saint Joseph's protection. You know, we had priests pray over us. You know, we were open to all the graces God wanted for us, you know. And
speaking real quick, speaking of priests praying over you, wasn't there I remember you saying something earlier, like years before something. Did you go back to the shrine or something like that?
Yeah. So,
No, I don't mean to make you jump way back, but
no, yeah. So like after our second loss, we went back to the shrine. We're like, let's, we vacation there again and let's ask the priest to pray over us again. And, when we went there for mass and we talked to this visiting priest who was just there for like a day or two, he said these beautiful prayers over us. And he was saying prayers like, I could see the child crying. I could see the laughter. I could see all these beautiful things. And at the end of the prayer, he was like, all right, let me know when the baby comes. And we were like, all right, another like awesome consolation,
wow.
And, so fast forward, we're going like, month 2, month 3, month 4, where things are going well, month 5, month 6. And we started noticing like one of the things the doctors were looking at was like our daughter was like, she was growing in the womb, but like at a slower rate. So she was called like she was gestationally on the smaller side, like her percentiles were going down. And that's usually because of like an immune response or like maybe a placental issue, but they can only assess like so much, outside of that. So, I remember at one point they measured my daughter's femur, like they can measure like the bones and stuff.
Yeah.
And they said your daughter's femur's in the 1 percentile. And I was like, what does that mean? And I was like, they're like, oh, it's like, the doctors were like, it's not a big deal as long as she keeps growing. I'm like, is she gonna like be like, 4 foot when she's like an adult? Like, I don't know what that means. It's just like so many unknowns, and I think when you're going through the unknown, all you have is to rely on God and to pull you through it, And we kept praying to Father Solanus Casey, and we were hitting like the 8th month, and the doctors were like, hey, look, we typically want the child to come early because she's on the smaller side. We don't want her to be in the womb any longer. And we were gonna like, we'll set up where we would, put you in labor and we'll have the baby early. And we're like, okay. So we scheduled that, and a week later, my wife's like having all these contractions, and I'm like,
Naturally?
well, yeah. So naturally she started like having all these like contractions, which we weren't sure if they were just like, Braxton Hicks or whatever they call them. And, we had like another week to go before my wife would have got induced. And I remember it was the middle of the night, and she's like, hey, like something's like going on. Like, I think we need to go. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So we drove through the middle of the night to the hospital. And thanks be to God, that afternoon, my daughter was born.
We get an applause.
An absolute miracle. I remember she came out and she was screaming, and I was like, yes, that's good. And, they had like a team there because they knew like, my wife was high risk and like the baby was on the smaller side, and they were like, gonna have oxygen and all this stuff. And she came out and she was like perfectly healthy and didn't need any medical treatment. And, I remember holding her for the first time, and that the first like hour of her life, I feel like the world stopped. And yeah, it was just awesome.
Well, and what's her name?
Rosalia. So Rosalia Carmela Maria Giuseppina Mangiarelli. So a nice Irish name. And we had to get the Holy Family in there, especially Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah, even when I was praying to God, I was like, if I have a boy, I'm gonna name him Joseph. And then we found out we're having a girl, and Lenore's like, Giuseppina, and I'm like, or Josephina or Josephine. I'm like, we'll think about it, because then we came across Saint Rosalia, who we really like. So, we named her after her. Um, and yeah, so we now have this beautiful 19-month-old daughter who's just a little busy person who's super sweet, and can't imagine, like, I'm sure people say this about their children all the time. You can't imagine a better child. Like, it was worth the wait. It was worth the the constant, the trials, the tribulations, the constant, like, giving that hope back to God. The constant being nailed to the cross, to finally being fulfilled, and, like, this area of our life been resurrected. And it's it's something, like, I think it's easy for parents to take for granted of having kids. And I'm just like, we're just, like, so blessed, like, it's amazing. And, like, we, it just feels like time has slowed down. And it's just, God is, it's, in retrospect, God was so close to us during that whole process, but we were kind of blinded by just all the fear and worrying. But I'm not saying we were perfect by any means, but I think all along, God, I think that miraculous medal that was placed in my hand saying, this is going to be for your daughter one day, that was God's, like, way of saying, like, you have to trust me. And and here she is.
It's crazy too that was near the beginning, right?
Yeah.
That miraculous medal thing was, like, early on.
Yeah. It was really early on, and we always thought it was going to happen way sooner than that. Not 7 years. Coincidentally, the seven's like a year, like it's a good biblical number. I believe it's, like, meant for, like harvest or something like that, or somebody told me. But, like, it's like, we finally
You had your harvest.
Yeah. Yep. Amazing.
Yeah. Glory to God. I was so overjoyed when obviously when she was born, and just knowing everything you guys went through. And it's so interesting when we detach, like, our children aren't ours. And the thing is, like, we're kind of always adoptive parents in a way, of our children, because they're not ours. And even now, like, as I don't know how you feel, but as a father myself, like, I've gone through periods. It's actually funny. I think you went through it before, and I've had to deal with this after they were born, of what Abraham did, where he was asked, like you mentioned earlier, like, are you willing to sacrifice your son or your child? At any given moment, God asks you to. Can you let go? And I've had to face that in my own personal journey, of, like, moments where I've had to the best of my ability, by God's grace, have that willingness that you had developed beforehand, that we are still called. And of course you're still called. Like, your parent is never not called to be willing to let go of their child in any way. It doesn't just mean life or death, but it could be in a situation or whatever it is. Not to idolize them still, and to remember that they're God's. But what's so cool about you and Lenore is that you this holy, I say this increasingly a lot. Said it in another interview, but like a holy indifference in the best way possible, the uniformity with God's will. And now that you guys got, you received the gift that you wanted for 7 years at least, but you don't, it's like properly ordered now. Like when I look at you guys, it's not like, oh, we got our daughter and she's our everything and she's our princess and we're going to splurge on her. We're going to give her the best life and she'll never suffer. And I don't get that from you guys at all. I get it's totally balanced. It's totally ordered. You don't idolize your child. She now fits properly into your family unit, but your marriage is like there's no doubt that your marriage is that you both know it's first and foremost, and that's going to actually be one of the most fruitful things you can give your daughter is like that you love your wife first and foremost, you know, and that everything flows from that. All love flows from that to your daughter and so on.
Yeah. I mean, you think one day, like, you know, your children are going to grow up and they're going to have to find what their vocation is. And at some point, it's just going to be you and your wife again. Like, it's just you two. And then, you know, if they become a priest or nun or married or, you know, whatever their calling is, like they're going to be, that's where they're going to need to be. And they're essentially like no longer yours, you know, and you have to show your kids like that is the way. So the only way to do that is putting your marriage first, that they could see you set the example. So, you know, if your son one day wants to become a priest, he's going to be married, you know, to the church. But what better way of seeing that than seeing how you are married, you know, to your wife, you know? So, I think people kind of miss that, you know, like that it's really easy to think like, yeah, like my daughter's going to be in my life forever. Like, I don't know what God's will is for her. But one day if she's called to marriage, then, you know, like her husband becomes the single most important person in her life, not her dad and not her mom, you know, and that's why it's the only sacrament where two become one flesh, you know. So it's not just nice fancy words. It's a real reality.
Right. So thank you for sharing all of that. I think that was I'm so glad that you shared every detail, because every detail mattered in that. I mean, there was absolutely someone else walking that exact spot that I have a good confidence that God will bring this to them so that they can hear how you walked through it. But I want to close with your input, your advice, your thoughts on the two things. First, I think at the end, and then I'll wrap around. So you went through it. You, in the end, received the supreme gift of marriage and a child. But you've also been through that hell all along the way. Like, you know what it's like at the lowest point where there seems to be no hope. What would you say to a couple who maybe they've been told they're never going to conceive, or maybe whatever the case? Like, what do you say to the couple who let's just say that they're not going to have a child and they're not going to adopt? They can't do either. What have you learned from your journey that you could leave them with to say, I mean, aside from what we just said about marriage, which that might be the answer, but like, what do they focus on now?
Yeah, I have a really good quote from Fulton Sheen that I think is really fruitful. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read it. He says, for the childless couples, where there is no frustration of love's overflow, the law of marriage still holds true. It takes three to make love, and that third is God seen not in children, but through his resignation to his will. I think that completely encapsulates it. Like, we have to realize that this lifetime we have on earth is so short, and that's what God's calling us to do, is resign our will to his. And it's in so many different ways, it's going to be painful for all of us. You know, it's not, infertility is extremely painful, but God will fill that void in other ways. And for years, God did fill that void in other ways. And I'm so glad he gave me my wife to endure that with, you know, and I would never take away that time that we experienced together. And even with loss and losing, losing children through adoption, the cross will always be there, and it's going to appear, I think, differently for everybody. But, just because you might see the couple in the pews with 10 kids, you don't know what they're experiencing, but that resignation to God's will is where really you're going to find your peace at the end of the day. Like I said, I think there's probably plenty of families out there that have a bunch of kids, but they're not completely fulfilled unless they're totally united with God, and that's, I guess that's as simply as I could put it at the end of the day, is like, your marriage is fruitful. Like, don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. Hear it from the saints, hear it from, the Psalms. Elizabeth was barren for all those years as well. Yes, she was fulfilled with John the Baptist, but, your marriage is fruitful. And if you ask God for the graces and what gifts he wants you to give to others, you will be fulfilled, children or no children. And I know that my wife and I were ready for that we were willing to go through life without having any children. But I know at the end of the day that there was going to be massive fruits that would come from that, and I think it's good to remain fruitful, remain hopeful in the midst of the suffering you're enduring, in the hope that maybe God would bless you with children. I mean, we are called to, to hope. Hope is a virtue, and
hope abounds.
I would say, pray with your spouse, go to adoration, sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, tell the Lord everything what you're feeling, beg him to show you what he has in store for you. You don't know unless you ask, and I promise you, you'll be fulfilled, and I know people might think of me like, oh, well, it's easy for you to say you were given the gift, but I'm telling you, for 7 years, I was ready. I was at that place where I completely just let it go, like, this is all we have left is just my wife and I, then I'd be completely satisfied, and if more couples went into marriage thinking it that way, then I think they would find much joy no matter what comes their way, So.
Also, to be grateful that you have a wife or a husband, because there are people who get married and then tragedy strikes and their spouse dies, or what have you, or they have a spouse and children, and again, a tragedy occurs and they have no one. So I think that's also, perspective is always good. It doesn't negate the suffering of not having a child, but like see the value in your spouse if you have one in this situation, because there are some people who lost everything and they're alone. And even if we are called to be alone, this is so much easier said than done, but even in that situation, we still have to give glory to God because he gives and he takes away.
Yeah, like you said, like that holy indifference, praise God that he blessed me with children, praise God that he didn't bless me with children, and we always have to have the eternal perspective. It's so hard to do in our modern times because we're constantly distracted with what's going on with now, but you have to have the 30,000 foot view of eternity and see like why, God through his permissible will allows these certain crosses and sufferings to occur. And we will be so thankful when we get to see the full picture, but that's, I guess, not our place right now. Because there's plenty of suffering going on. There's a lot of reasons why we can be asking, like, why is this person dealing with infertility? Why did this guy lose his son? Why was this person tragically murdered? Why is this wife, this mom of 6 have cancer? Like,
As the Bible says, it's not ours to reason why.
Yep. So, I will say, if you're a couple struggling with infertility, there's nothing wrong exhausting those options of finding what's helpful. So I would definitely look into natural procreation technologies, especially as a Catholic. I would look at Paul VI Institute and see all the fine work that's doing there. I know Dr. Michaela Behrens was our physician there, and she was wonderful. You could look at reproductive immunology with Dr. Durbala. There's other doctors throughout the country, I think, that do that as well. Dr. Lasaletta, who was integral in finding out and teaching us how to observe our chart and getting the process going for us. All the, talking to your spiritual director, talking to your priest, talking to friends and family, asking those to pray for you, visit Our Lady La Leche Shrine, go to adoration, pray the rosary. Like, there's so many things, God will give you the graces through all these different things, and, I know for some people, God just can not magically, but miraculously bless couples with a child without any intervention, which is amazing. In some ways, I wish that was our case, but he does use people to he uses others' gifts to help us heal, and that's okay too, so don't, I guess, over spiritualize your health problems. If there's something wrong, like, seek help. My wife writes for a blog called Springs in the Desert for those who suffer, I think, loss and infertility. Extremely fruitful. There's so many little apostolates that popped up, especially for women, that they can use those resources to help them heal and get good advice, very much like things we talked about on today's show. So there's so much out there that you could do. But ultimately, stay close to Christ, pray with your spouse, give thanks to God. That's what he wants at the end of the day. He wants your marriage to be fruitful, and he just ask God, what do you want from me, Lord? And he's going to answer that prayer for you every single time.
And like I said before, children are called the supreme gift of marriage in the catechism. So I would say God is acknowledging, through the church, he knows children are the supreme gift. So if you are praying for to conceive, know that God sees the value. He obviously gives it, but he's acknowledging it. It's not an unfounded thing to desire a child to that degree. But also, should he, provide you that loss where you may never conceive or you never give birth, that he's asking you to give up the supreme gift on earth. So you have to be confident he's going to give you're going to be rewarded justly in heaven for letting go of that gift, or of your desire for that gift, or your reception of that gift.
Amen.
Okay. That was great. Thank you so much. I'm going to have you back on. For those who don't know, it was Bobby who helped me come up with the name Cultural Catholicism. We were sitting in a coffee shop many years ago talking about how the Catholic faith is everywhere in the culture. You just have to identify it. You just have to look for it. And you realize these things you love, there lies the faith. So I'm grateful that we finally get to talk. We're going to do it again. I'm going to have you on for more stuff. This was incredibly fruitful. And thank you for witnessing this journey of joys and sorrows.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick. God bless you.
God bless, man. Thanks. Thank you for watching, for your time. I pray that this conversation can help at least even one person in need, and that it gave you hope. If you did like it, please support by liking, sharing, subscribing. And if you want to donate either a prayer or monetarily, it's incredibly helpful. I don't take it for granted. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next one. God bless.